While reviewing a process, you have to think of it as a long structure of multiple processes linked together. Very rarely does one process operate in isolation. Typically, it always has some form of input and some form of output. Throughout a process, there may be a multitude of different inputs and outputs which are required in order for that section of the process to function. It is very important to think about these interlinking inputs and outputs, because often these parts of processes where they may be going interdepartmental or working between input from suppliers, outputs to customers, it's important you recognise these, as these are often weaker areas because we have lesser control of them. So identifying these inputs and outputs, clearly you have to define who or what is providing those inputs and how you go about obtaining that information. Linking these processes through process mapping or other forms of software gives a very good approach and recognition of how these links operate, and you can put some guidelines around the methodology to support that.
And this will go in conjunction with the second question as well, is that we like, if we're going to engage in consulting with any of our clients, we like to approach it from a business process mapping perspective. It's, in our understanding, the best way to define inputs and outputs. And we would look at it from a macro perspective. We'd look at the organization and its interrelationship of processes at a high level, and we would then drill down into the individual activities. So at a high level, what are the inputs and outputs, through from identifying customer needs and expectations or stakeholders, all the way through to the product being delivered and or the product life cycle, if we're having a look at ISO 14001. Also, what we like to do is, if we're drilling down into the activities from the process mapping, is you can understand what inputs are coming in from another process and what outputs are going in out from that particular activity. And business process mapping is our tool for that particular activity.
Many ways of doing this. You can actually just walk the process and ask where all the information comes from. I quite like to use a SIPOC analysis, so supplier, input, process, output, customer, and just walk through that process.
Inputs and outputs, as you could think of in the context of supporting your processes. So by inputs in plain English, what resources, materials, knowledge, skill sets, raw materials, equipment do we need to actually, in context of the quality standard, produce our product or service, in the context of, say, safety standard, to operate safely. In terms of outputs, it's saying what's really the end result of that process. Again, in a quality context, what's the end product or the end result of our service that we are looking for? And you can think about that the same way for information security, safety. What's the intended outcome we are trying to achieve?
Simple. I've got a process I need to document. Your inputs, what do I need in order to achieve this? What is going to trigger me to go and engage this process? For example, let's go back to monitoring and measuring. If you have a monitoring and measuring procedure, what are the inputs? The inputs are your piece of plant or equipment that requires calibration. What are you going to need to do it? You're going to need, the other inputs you're going to need are, who do you calibrate it against? How do you determine those records? How do you maintain those records? These are all the inputs. Then your outputs is, what is your procedure trying to achieve? Our procedure is trying to produce these items here, therefore there's my outputs.
I've often mapped this stuff out into some sort of flow chart and have a fairly decent consultative process whereby you're asking and getting relevant people into the room and saying, look, when you're doing your bit of this process, who do you talk to? What do you need? Who provides you with this? What is the ultimate output? Are there some other outputs that aren't really concerned too much with the end product, but they support the development of the product, for example? So you're going to have to ask a lot of questions, ask the right people, have the right people in the room, and really be quite systematic about how you do this. And I generally would be wanting to see some sort of whiteboard or something like that, where we're just working our way through it. And it should, of course, be iterative as well. So you will never get everything the first time. This should be reviewed, obviously, on a regular basis.
And the best way is to do a flow chart from the moment that you receive the inquiry and to the final dispatch or invoicing, or the final delivery of your service or product. That would be the best and easiest way of documenting it.
If you enjoyed this video, click on the link to view the next compliance conversation.